Well, we are now into March, and before we really get into garden season, we wanted to talk about a few what I think are really good questions that we had on our rabbit fodder system. So for anybody who maybe didn't see that video or is just finding us, we feed fodder, wheat fodder, to our rabbits, particularly in sort of the late fall, winter, and early spring when there really isn't any green food available. And although I know that feeding green food to rabbits is sometimes a contentious topic, it's been working really well for us, and we used to do this on a pretty big scale historically. So this year we started that system back up. So before we get into this too far, we're going to basically talk about the big elephant in the room. Feeding fodder does not save you time or effort because you are offsetting your time because you're going to spend more time doing this, but that offset is going to save you money. And that is a huge linchpin piece of the discussion on why you should feed your rabbits fodder. So the first question we're going to talk about is, can you skip pellet feedings, or can you do this instead of feeding pellets? And the short answer is kind of. And I'm going to explain that. If you're talking sort of a maintenance ration for rabbits that aren't producing, i.e. your bucks or your does in the middle of the winter, keeping in mind that we mostly feed this as a winter food or a non-summer growing season food, you can if you have enough volume per rabbit. So right now with our sort of feeding program, we're feeding the fodder every day to every rabbit we have, and we're feeding pellets about once or twice a week, although not full portion. And it sort of depends on the weather. When we have a really big cold snap coming, we'll often give them a little bit more just because our rabbits are technically outside. Now, we also make sure that we always have hay available to the rabbits. We do feed a second cut hay. It does really well, and it basically keeps them bulked up. So the fodder is giving them sort of the energy side of things, and the hay is giving them that roughage and whatnot that they need. Now you can also use things like root vegetables, things like beets, turnips, rutabagas, carrots, that kind of thing. And you can also use, if you have them available, things like willow and poplar branches and sort of that woody vegetation that young growth that rabbits during the winter months really like. So when it comes to sort of that grow outs, or as we say, rabbits that are doing something, growing, producing babies, etc., I would say no, you can't. The caveat to that is maybe you could if you really scaled it up, and we just don't have the space for that kind of fodder production. So another good question we got was kind of twofold, I guess. Can you feed it to other animals? And I think that's an astounding yes. You can feed fodder to everything from rabbits to poultry, although we're going to come back to that in a moment, to even big animals like sheep and goats and cows, if you have a big enough system to produce enough bulk or biomass to actually make it worthwhile. Obviously, feeding cows fodder, you can imagine how big of a system you're going to have in place to actually do that. But yes, basically you can totally feed it to other animals, and even some things like our cats. They don't eat it in a big way, but they do like to snack on it. When we usually take it out in the morning before we cut it up, we'll put it on the floor, and usually a couple of them will come over. So it does make a really good food source for a wide range of animals. So what about poultry? And keep in mind, this is just our experiences in the past having done this. So I'm going to start with, actually in reverse order, geese. Geese do really well with it. They'll pretty much eat the whole thing. And that's one thing about the fodder system, the way we have it set up, is you have the green grass part, but you also have the roots and sort of that leftover seed bit. And some animals, like the rabbits, will eat the whole thing. But this is where we find it personally problematic when we switch to some other poultry, such as chickens. So one animal that we actually have found, aside from the rabbits, that really likes the fodder when we break it up a little bit is the ducks. And I'm going to say it, when it's really cold out and the water freezes quickly, probably not the best idea to feed it to them because they may not consume it quick enough. But as soon as the temperature comes up enough that that water stays open for longer, basically, we just put this with any of the extra grains that didn't sprout in the water, and by the end of the day, it's gone. So the ducks, we definitely find, are better users of it than the chickens, but it really is probably going to be experimenting on your part as to whether your chickens will eat it well, if you have ducks or geese, whether they would eat it well, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, that was an epic cat fail. And as a total little side note, we left the gate open And these little bums are out in the garden in a flash. Boy, they like to get out there and scratch and forage in the spring.
So when it comes to chickens, both large chickens and bantams like our silkies, something that we've found is they will eat it, but they might not be the best users of it. What I mean by that is all chickens love the green part, but to get that, they tend to be a little bit wasteful. Again, this is just what we have found in the past. So we don't tend to feed it to them because we find that half the biomass of the fodder kind of goes to waste with the chickens. So another advantage to doing this is technically we can eat this as well. So we're going to cut a few of them today to put in our smoothie. And there you go, wheatgrass, which is quite the healthy thing for humans to eat. So why not rabbits too? So the next question I think is a little more complicated, or there's a little more to it. And it's in our choice of using the wheat berries or the wheat instead of barley or oats or various other things. When you do a lot of research online, barley is actually the one that tends to come up and is sort of the preference. But we have experimented with barley, we've experimented with oats, and obviously we've experimented with wheat. And for us, we found the wheat was the most predictable, sort of dependable as far as actually all sprouting at the same time, but also the cleanest. And one comment we got was actually that when somebody had sprouted barley, their barley kind of went moldy. And that's exactly the experience we have had in the past. So two things that I think kind of go hand in hand with this a little bit are in kind of our system. One, our water. Where we used to live, our normal well water, I'm going to say it, maybe wasn't as good as the well water we have here. That's just anecdotal. But one thing we really notice here is we don't get that mold buildup. Another thing that we definitely find is the way we move the fodder up and down the rack. By doing the last 2 days at the top where they don't get watered, we really find a big difference. And I think it has something to do with on those last 2 days when you're starting to get quite a bit of growth from the wheat, by being that little bit drier and keeping in mind that it is in a plastic container, it seems to dry out the root mat a bit, which really seems to reduce the amount of molding. So one thing about the fodder system that we really like is the fact that essentially our rabbits are getting green food year round. In the summer, whether they're on tractor or whether they're or on grass on tractors, or whether they're eating weeds that we pick for them, our rabbit herd eats a lot of green matter. And the one thing, which is kind of, I think, the word of warning is, if you have rabbits that are not used to eating green food and you suddenly give them a whole lot of it, you could run into problems. And the reason why you can run into problems is because rabbits' gut system is working on sort of fermentation. It's not exactly like the rumen of a cow, etc., but it's the same principle. If a cow has been eating hay all winter and you suddenly turn it out into super lush pasture, they bloat and that can kill them. And rabbits are no different, but they're a lot smaller and it happens a lot faster. So by feeding them this way, as soon as that pasture or green food is available, we can put them right onto that. So on the flip side, the one thing we'll also say is, although the fodder is a great feed, the hay, the twigs, for that roughage, for lack of a better way to put it, is still very important to keep their gut working properly. So that's why we say, if you're going to do this, it's definitely beneficial to make sure they do have access to hay or some other kind of roughage to sort of balance that out, because otherwise they're getting an awful lot of the really good stuff. And well, we all know how that sometimes ends going through your system. So that's kind of a rundown on some of the questions, and I guess just some things we've been finding. I mean, we'll go into numbers at a later date this year, but
it saves us a lot of money.
that's exactly what I was about to say. This has definitely saved us a lot of money, and it really comes down to, it's the fact you're taking a seed that's quite small and you are growing it into something that's a lot bigger. It's kind of as simple as that. So kind of as we've said before, this is sort of one tool in our toolbox to help us sort of feed the rabbits well, reduce our feed costs a little bit. It certainly doesn't save time, to be honest with you, but that's really not the point. We're not trying to save time. We're trying to do this a little more efficient, not the right word, slightly more sustainable, although obviously the big thing here is we still need external outputs because we don't grow enough wheat to make this feasible. But we can take a little bit and make it into a lot. Fodder really for us is a great, as we say, late fall, winter, and early spring, at the time of year when you can kind of see around me everything's brown and muddy and there's very little growth. When we don't have a lot to feed the rabbits, it's an economical way to feed them healthy. And as we've kind of talked about here, we can feed some of our other livestock it, and even we eat it. So it's definitely worthwhile.